we'd like to recognize, the chair recognizes Mr. Downey for 5 minutes for questions.
Madam Chair, thank you for allowing me to testify here, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. I really appreciate it. I'm just going to jump right into it. I'm going to start with Mr. Carlson. In my home district of central and eastern Montana, all 5 of our tribal reservations are members of the Intertribal Buffalo Council, or ITBC. As you mentioned in your testimony, the ITBC has been growing by 5 tribes per year since its inception in 1992 and now has over 90 member tribes. So, Mr. Carlson, what factors have contributed to the continued growth of the ITBC?
Thank you for the question. I guess the factors of the tribal nations, see ITBC as a workable option to reconnect, Buffalo through restoration of the herds to their lands, and then also to access financial support and technical services that ITBC provides for all of the tribes that are a part of the ITBC, infrastructure and all of those, which tribes are, always underfunded. So we try to work to get those funds out to those tribes. So that's the real part of the continued growth of, and the biggest, thing of the growth of them is just bringing those back to their lands to help with, as I mentioned earlier, for the health of not only the people but of their lands also.
Well, thank you. You mentioned in your testimony the economic opportunities that the tribal bison industry brings. Can you elaborate on these benefits for the tribes?
So some of the tribes, as I mentioned earlier also, that they want them just purely for the cultural, aspect of them, and returning that. They're very spiritual to us. But there's tribes that have a larger land base and a larger population that they're able to a certain extent, to sell the animals or to put them out on the market and help with not only sustaining the buffalo program, but also contributing to the tribal coffers to help with the rest of the population.
All right, thank you. For tribes that are part of the ITBC, what are the most significant challenges they face when looking to start or to expand tribal herds?
Well, the biggest challenge that they do face, of course, again, is funding, and a land base, infrastructure. So those are the biggest challenges that ITBC is able to help, within those areas. We certainly back here for years. We've out here, and we have Hurd development grants that we have funding for. And for the past years, it's been at $1.4 million. And for 90 tribes, that's very little dollar amount for them. But just as buffalo are, the tribes are very resilient. But those challenges are always there for them. And of course, we do have challenges every day that we will have to overcome. But the biggest part is the funding and getting out there and helping them with their infrastructure and keeping them going.
Thank you. So how would the passage of my colleague, Representative Hurd's Don Young, Doug LaMalfa Indian Buffalo Management Act expand the scope of the work the ITBC is able to accomplish?
To put this here for the government to work on a government basis with the Intertribal Buffalo Council and all of the tribes that are part of that, and to get this year as law into the interior or wherever it comes, and just being in there and being there. Right now, our funding is just wherever it might be, and not solidified or law in there. This would create that where we would be there and solidify that, and then we could work on the funding to that in later years.
Thank you. I'm going to move on here in my last few seconds. I'm going to move on to Ms. Carlos to discuss the current state of the Indian health system. Can you elaborate on why you believe the current 72-hour required notification deadline for IHS for emergency medical treatment is unrealistic for many tribal patients?
Yes, thank you. As we've seen, when the medical emergency is happening, our priority, of course, is making sure our relatives are okay. And oftentimes that means coordinating care after the fact. And so we should be focused on making sure that the person is situated, that their aftercare is situated, if they need to go to a rehabilitation center, anything like that, making sure that those plans are in place versus trying to coordinate with PRC and saying, hey, by the way, our relative was seen in a non-IHS facility. What paperwork do we need to start doing versus if somebody uses private insurance, they don't have to say, they don't have to worry about billing until the billing comes to them. That's not the case for our IHS, people who utilize IHS facilities or non-IHS facilities or PRC. And so if that's, in that case, the 72-hour window is way too small.
Right.
We see that, if it's a medical emergency, we're trying to make sure that person is okay. If this is a 15-day window, it allows us to get them situated, get them stabilized, coordinate family resources, and then worry about the administrative burden after the fact.
Right. Thank you very much for your answer, and thank you all for being here. Unfortunately, I've run out of time, so on that, Madam Chair, I yield.
The chair now recognizes Ms. Grijalva for 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The legislation before us today reflects the federal government's trust and treaty obligations to tribal nations and the urgent need to address longstanding inequities facing Native communities. I especially want to recognize Representative Ledger Fernandez for her leadership on this legislation, confronting the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous people and strengthening public safety and accountability for tribal communities. Just last year in southern Arizona, Emily Pike, a 14-year-old member of the San Carlos Apache tribe, whose remains were found near Globe, Arizona. That's after she went missing from a Mesa group home. This forced Arizona and the nation to confront the systemic failures that continue to leave Native women and girls vulnerable. Emily's case exposed the consequences of delayed responses, jurisdictional gaps, and chronic underinvestment in tribal public safety systems, and galvanized the movement behind Emily's Law and Arizona's Turquoise Alert. Those systems ensure missing Indigenous people receive immediate public attention and coordinated action. In Arizona's 7th Congressional District, these issues are deeply personal and immediate. Our district is home to the Tohono Nation, Pasquayaqui tribe, Cocopa, and Quechan. These communities that continue to confront the devastating realities of missing and murdered Indigenous peoples, jurisdictional gaps, and under-resourced public safety systems, and generations of federal neglect. The crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and relatives continues to devastate the tribal communities in southern Arizona. Families are too often face delayed investigations, poor coordination between agencies, and under-resourced public safety systems. Challenges that even more severe in border communities like the Tohono Nation. That's why this legislation matters today. Strengthening tribal law enforcement, improving data sharing, supporting cultural preservation, and addressing healthcare barriers are critical steps towards justice and accountability for Native families. At a time when this administration and congressional leadership continue to weaken the investments and undermine tribal consultation, Congress must instead commit to partnership and respect for tribal sovereignty and long overdue investments. So some of the questions I have, and this one we are dealing with the Indian Buffalo Management Act. Is that correct? Yeah. Mr. Carlson, I'm interested in hearing more about how the Indian Buffalo Management Act would support youth education. Could you elaborate on your earlier point?
Sorry, ma'am, could you repeat that?
Yeah, of course. I'm interested in hearing more on how Indian Buffalo Management Act would support youth education. And could you elaborate on that?
Revegetation? Education. Oh, education.
Youth education.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry.
The hearing's kind of bad. So the education to, I guess I'm kind of confused as to the question. Could you kind of elaborate a little bit what?
How would the Indian Buffalo Management Act support youth education?
Youth education.
Yes,
young
young
okay.
people.
There we go. Yes, thank you. You know, one of the things that there's a big part of our history that has never been told, and even myself, you know, have never had any buffalo stories. My grandparents, who I was raised by, have never, you know, had those stories. One of the things that's very important to us is that, and to me dearly, is that our history has been erased, and that history, if we can go back to teach our our young and our youth. Right now at home we have, and I'm missing it, I'm supposed to be there, but the hearing is very important. We have what we call Ini Days, and Ini is Buffalo for Blackfeet. And that is there to teach all of the few days that we're doing it is to teach our youth the importance of the buffalo to them and bringing them forward. One of the big things that teaches our youth, which is really needed in Indian country and all over, is respect. That are part of the things that we've lost with our youth.
Thank you.
And teaching them that.
Thank you. Ms. Nagel, thank you for being here today. Your testimony was powerful, and I want to work with you in improving public safety and bringing closure to families. Would you speak further on the importance of the grant program under badges and how it will provide critical resources to those committed to searching for individuals?
Thank you. The grant program is critical. As you pointed out in the case of Emily Pike, so often families are actually the ones who go out and look for their missing loved ones in Indian country, but they don't have resources. I can't tell you how many families I have personally represented as their family attorney, and they say, Mary Catherine, where can we get money? Should we start a GoFundMe? They want to hire a private investigator. They want to take a drone out and search for their loved one on the tribal lands where she went missing. And so if we can get funds to tribes themselves for tribal law enforcement to perform these searches, or to the tribal organizations identified in the Badges Act, so maybe a nonprofit can distribute funding to families. They also struggle just to have gas money to go and test. When I remember when families were trying to testify before the Not Invisible Act Commission, some of them couldn't afford the gas money to go testify. Right. So our families, our victims' families, don't have the support right now they need to fight for their loved ones, and this Badges Act could provide that.
Great. Thank you so much. I yield back.
I want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to these in writing. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the committee must submit questions to the committee clerk by 5 p.m. on Wednesday, May 27, 2026. The hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there's no further business, without objection, this committee stands adjourned.